Imagine walking into your own family's Christmas party, and your mom yells across the room, "You're a burden, and we don't want you here." That was me, Emma Rayburn, frozen, humiliated, and heartbroken in front of everyone I loved, or so I thought. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. The party was warm and bright, full of laughter and cheer, but I felt invisible. My mom, Trina, ignored me, making little remarks about my life failures. When I accidentally spilled a drink, my cousin Mila laughed, and I felt every eye on me. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Mom shouted across the room, calling me a burden. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My own family had turned against me in that instant. I retreated to my old bedroom, heart aching, and remembered every little insult and slight over the years. That's when I decided I wouldn't let them break me. Quietly, I started learning about their secrets, my mom's hidden debts, my stepbrother Jace's shady schemes. With the help of my friend Liv, I planned to expose the truth, not with anger, but with careful strategy. Months later, I returned under the guise of reconciliation. I stayed calm as Mom bragged about my failures, dropping hints to the family lawyer about her lies. Slowly, my family started seeing the truth. I confronted Mom, not yelling, just strong and composed. Finally, I realized my worth wasn't tied to their approval. I gained respect, reclaimed my dignity, and learned that sometimes the best revenge is rising above betrayal and shining on your own. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine as I stepped inside, lights twinkling on every corner. Laughter floated from the living room, and the faint sound of holiday music filled the air. From the outside, everything looked perfect, Mom Trina arranging ornaments, Dad Carl chatting with neighbors, stepbrother Jace joking with friends, and cousin Mila smiling brightly. I walked in slowly, trying not to draw attention, my hands slightly trembling. Something in the way they glanced at me made my stomach tighten. I forced a smile, hoping to blend into the warmth of the room, but the air felt different, heavy with unspoken words. Every hug felt brief, every greeting distant, and I realized that beneath the cheerful decorations, tension lingered. I moved toward the dining area, careful not to knock over anything, noticing small whispers between family members that stopped the moment I approached. The noise, the lights, the clinking of glasses, everything that usually brought comfort now seemed to highlight my unease. I tried to keep my voice light and cheerful, but it felt forced. Every laugh sounded hollow, every glance felt like judgment. It was clear that tonight wasn't going to be like the memories I cherished from past holidays. Something had shifted in the house, something I couldn't yet name, but I could feel it pressing on me with every step I took. I just wanted to survive the evening without drawing attention, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever tension was here would soon reach me directly. I approached Mom Trina, hoping to share a quick hello, but she barely looked at me. Her words were clipped, and every sentence carried a sharp edge disguised as concern. She asked about my job and living situation, but her tone made it feel like she was pointing out how far behind I was compared to everyone else. I smiled politely, trying not to show how much it stung, but her subtle digs made my chest tighten. As I reached for my drink, my hand shook slightly, and the cup slipped from my fingers, splashing across the table. The red liquid spread quickly, and before I could react, cousin Mila burst into laughter, her voice echoing through the room. The sound cut deep, and I felt my cheeks burn. A few heads turned, some with amusement, some with mild annoyance, and I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. The whispers started then, quiet murmurs that stopped whenever I looked, but the meaning was clear. I could sense them shifting subtly, glancing in my direction more often than before, sharing looks that made me feel exposed. Every attempt to join conversations or engage in light-hearted chatter was met with polite dismissal or a smirk I couldn't ignore. It was as if the warmth of the holiday around me had vanished, replaced by an invisible wall that separated me from the rest of the family. I felt small, isolated, and painfully aware that tonight, I was not welcome, not really. Dinner began with the clatter of plates and the smell of roasted turkey, but a heavy silence hung over me as I tried to participate. I offered a comment about the mashed potatoes, hoping for a small smile or nod, but Mom Trina's eyes narrowed instead. Then, without warning, her voice cut through the room, sharp and loud enough to make everyone pause. "You're a burden, Emma. We don't want you here. You never amount to anything," she said, each word hitting me like a hammer. My fork froze midair, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. The faces around the table didn't meet mine. Dad looked down at his plate, Jace shifted uncomfortably, and even Mila's laughter from earlier vanished. I felt my chest tighten, and the warmth I had hoped to find in the room drained away instantly. Every eye avoiding mine felt like another betrayal, and the room seemed to close in on me. My hands shook, my stomach churned, and the shame was suffocating. The disbelief made my head spin. I couldn't understand how someone who was supposed to love me could say such cruel things so openly. Without thinking, I pushed my chair back and stood up. The clinking of silverware on plates sounded deafening in my ears as I moved toward the door. Each step away from the table was heavy, my heart pounding with a mix of humiliation and hurt. I left the dining room quietly, my mind racing, trying to process the betrayal I never expected to face in the very place I should have felt safe. I shut the door behind me and sank onto the edge of my childhood bed, the familiar walls offering a fragile sense of safety. Memories of years past flooded back, moments when little remarks were disguised as jokes, times when my opinions were brushed aside, or when achievements were met with barely a nod. Each memory, once easy to dismiss, now felt like a thread in a pattern I had ignored for too long. The quiet of the room pressed against me as I thought about all the times I had felt invisible, the times I had smiled through hurt just to keep the peace. It wasn't just tonight, it had been happening for years, subtle but relentless. The realization stung, but it also sparked something else, a clarity I hadn't allowed myself before. I clenched my fists, feeling a mix of sorrow and determination. I would not continue to shrink, to pretend that their words and judgments defined me. The anger was tempered with resolve, a silent promise that I would no longer be the target of their dismissals or the invisible presence at every gathering. Tonight had been the breaking point, and from now on, I would protect myself, stand tall, and ensure my voice mattered. I allowed myself a long, steadying breath, feeling the first flicker of strength return, ready to face whatever came next without fear of being overlooked or belittled again. I spent the next few days thinking carefully about what to do. I didn't want to lash out or make a scene, that wouldn't fix anything. What I needed was a plan, something that would reveal the truth without stooping to their level. I started paying closer attention to the little things I had ignored before, overheard phone calls, documents lying around, and the way money seemed to move quietly in the background. It didn't take long to notice Mom Trina hiding bills and investments she never mentioned, pretending everything was fine while the family boasted about wealth and success. Jace, my stepbrother, had his own side projects that seemed legitimate on the surface but smelled of dishonesty when I looked deeper. Every detail I uncovered built a clearer picture of the hypocrisy that had surrounded me all my life. I confided in Liv, my childhood friend who had always known the real me. She listened quietly as I explained what I'd discovered and encouraged me to handle things smartly, to let intelligence, not anger, guide my actions. Her calm advice became the anchor I needed. I realized I didn't have to confront them with shouting or accusations, I could let the truth come out in a way that couldn't be ignored. As I pieced together each bit of evidence, a sense of control returned. For the first time in years, I felt like I had power, not to hurt them, but to protect myself and finally expose the cracks in their perfect facade. Every careful step I took strengthened my resolve to stand tall and prove, quietly but undeniably, that I was not the weak one they had always assumed I was. A few weeks later, I accepted the invitation to my family's New Year's gathering, framing it as a gesture of peace. I dressed simply, smiling politely as I walked into the familiar house, careful to appear friendly and composed. Inside, the room buzzed with conversation, champagne glasses clinking, and cheerful voices filling the air, but I stayed alert, watching everything closely. Mom Trina moved from group to group, recounting my supposed mistakes to anyone who would listen. She laughed as she exaggerated stories of my life struggles, painting me as incapable and dependent. I felt the sting, but I forced a neutral expression, refusing to react. I let her words flow over me, silent and measured, while I watched the reactions of others, curious, concerned, or quietly skeptical. Instead of confronting her, I spoke to people casually, dropping subtle questions and comments that hinted at inconsistencies in her stories. "Oh, I thought Emma mentioned she managed that project successfully?" I said lightly to a distant cousin. "Really? I wasn't aware of that," another guest murmured. Each small exchange planted a tiny seed of doubt, and I could sense the room beginning to shift, just slightly. I remained poised, calm, and deliberate, letting my presence speak as much as my words. By the end of the evening, I knew I had begun unraveling the false narrative my mother had built. Without raising my voice, I was quietly steering the perception of the people around me, preparing the way for the truth to come out in a way they couldn't dismiss. I waited until the right moment and sent an anonymous note to the family lawyer, detailing everything I had uncovered: Mom Trina's hidden debts, the way she had mismanaged accounts, and Jace's attempts to manipulate inheritance documents. I didn't need recognition, I just wanted the truth to surface. Within days, quiet inquiries began. Jace was called in to clarify his claims and found himself unable to explain the inconsistencies in his statements. The lawyer uncovered documents that contradicted everything Mom had boasted about, revealing layers of mismanagement that had been hidden for years. The truth slowly began to ripple through the family, subtle at first, like an undercurrent of doubt spreading from one member to the next. I watched from the sidelines as relatives started asking questions, noticing the tension in Trina's expression and the nervous shifting of Jace. Whispers circulated about responsibilities that had been ignored, funds that had disappeared, and stories that didn't add up. Piece by piece, the narrative they had built about me being incapable and weak began to crumble, replaced by a dawning awareness that the real failures had been theirs all along. It was strange to feel vindicated without speaking a word. The weight I had carried for years, the shame imposed upon me, slowly lifted as the reality of their deceit became clear to everyone else. I didn't need confrontation, the truth was exposing itself naturally, leaving the family to grapple with the consequences of their own actions, while I observed quietly, feeling the first genuine sense of relief and quiet triumph in years. A few days after the revelations began surfacing, I asked Mom Trina to speak with me alone. We went into the quiet study, away from the rest of the house, and I stood facing her, steady and composed. My heart was pounding, but my voice remained calm, controlled. "Do you know what it feels like to be made invisible by the people who are supposed to love you?" I asked, looking her directly in the eyes. The words hung in the air, and I could see her freeze, her usual defenses faltering for the first time. She opened her mouth, ready to deny or deflect, but I didn't let her interrupt. I told her how years of dismissal, hidden judgments, and public embarrassment had hurt me, how I had felt sidelined in my own family, ignored and belittled. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I simply laid the truth out, letting the weight of my experience speak louder than anger ever could. Trina's face shifted from shock to defensiveness, her lips pressed tight, but I could see the tremor of guilt and disbelief behind her eyes. My calm, steady presence seemed to reach her in a way yelling never could. For the first time, she was confronted not with rebellion, but with the undeniable truth of how her actions had affected me. Standing there, I felt an unexpected sense of power, not over her, but over my own life. I no longer needed approval, and I no longer needed to hide my pain. I had finally shown her, firmly yet peacefully, that I was not invisible, and that I would never allow her words to define me again. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere within the family shifted in ways I had only hoped for. My siblings and other relatives began noticing a change in how they perceived me. Conversations that once ignored my opinions now paused for my input, and small acknowledgments of my accomplishments replaced the dismissive glances I was used to. It was subtle, but I could feel respect growing where doubt and scorn had once lived. Mom Trina and Jace, on the other hand, were no longer able to maintain their carefully crafted image. At gatherings, friends and extended relatives asked pointed questions, noticing inconsistencies and questionable decisions that had previously gone unnoticed. Their discomfort was visible, their usual charm replaced by awkwardness, as the truth quietly undermined the facade they had maintained for so long. I didn't need to gloat or seek revenge. Watching the recognition shift naturally, seeing people reevaluate what they had assumed about me, was enough. The power of truth and clarity was more satisfying than any confrontation could have been. Every acknowledgement, every glance of approval, confirmed that I had regained control over my own story. For the first time in years, I felt secure in my identity, validated not because I had struck back, but because I had stood firm, let honesty prevail, and reclaimed my dignity. It was a quiet victory, one that no insult or hidden agenda could touch, and it reminded me that strength is often shown in composure, patience, and the courage to let truth speak for itself. The family gatherings after that felt different, almost tense. Mom Trina struggled to maintain her usual authority, her confident facade cracking in front of relatives who had started noticing her mistakes. Decisions she once controlled alone were questioned, and the household dynamic shifted quietly but unmistakably. Her influence, which had seemed unshakable, was no longer absolute. Meanwhile, I found myself treated with a newfound respect. Relatives who had once overlooked me began asking for advice, seeking my opinion, or simply listening when I spoke. People started recognizing the effort, intelligence, and independence I had cultivated over the years, seeing clearly what I had always been capable of, even if my own family had denied it. Cousin Mila approached me one afternoon, her expression heavy with regret. She admitted she had laughed at my missteps before and hinted at wanting to make amends. I listened carefully, acknowledging her words, but I remained composed and measured, aware that trust had to be rebuilt slowly. My response was calm and mature, showing that while I could forgive, I would not forget, nor would I allow old patterns to repeat. The household had changed, subtly but irreversibly. Control had shifted, respect had returned, and I had become a presence that could no longer be ignored. In witnessing Trina's embarrassment and recalibrated power, I understood that the fallout from betrayal could lead not to bitterness, but to a clear, enduring strength that others could no longer take lightly. In the weeks that followed, I finally felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. The tension that had weighed on me for so long began to lift, replaced by a quiet clarity. I realized that the opinions and approval I had once sought from my family did not define who I was or my value. I was capable, strong, and deserving of respect, regardless of their judgment. With that understanding, I turned my attention fully to my own life. I dedicated time to my career, pursuing goals I had once set aside, and found joy in achieving milestones on my own terms. Every step forward reinforced my confidence, reminding me that my efforts and abilities mattered far more than anyone's criticism. Friendships that had always been steady became even more meaningful. Surrounded by people who truly cared for me, I experienced a sense of belonging and acceptance I had longed for, a support network built on trust and genuine connection. Their encouragement strengthened my belief in myself and reminded me that family approval was optional, not essential. Through all of this, I grew into a version of myself that I had only glimpsed in private dreams, resilient, independent, and fully aware of my worth. The humiliation, betrayal, and pain had shaped me, but they no longer controlled me. Instead, they became a foundation for my growth, a reminder that victory is not about revenge but about reclaiming your life, embracing your value, and thriving on your own terms. Looking back, I understand now how deep family betrayal can cut. The hurt feels personal, like it reaches into every corner of your life, but I learned that pain doesn't have to dictate your path. With patience, careful thought, and a steady sense of self, it's possible to turn those wounds into a quiet strength that others can't take away. Intelligence and composure became my tools, showing me that dignity is more powerful than anger, and strategy more effective than impulsive reactions. I realized that holding on to bitterness only traps you in the past, while taking control of your own story allows you to rise above the hurt. Every small step I took, every observation and decision, reinforced that empowerment comes from within, not from recognition or approval from those who have hurt you. I found that even in the midst of family tension, it's possible to stand firm, reclaim your voice, and navigate the storm with grace. Now, there's a quiet peace in my life, though the echoes of what happened linger, a reminder that not all wounds fully fade, and some scars shape who you become. But the lessons are enduring, strength is born from resilience, clarity grows from reflection, and self-worth is yours to define. My story is one of betrayal and humiliation, yes, but it's also a testament to rising above, to taking control, and to proving that even the harshest family trials can become the foundation for personal power and lasting dignity.